Hey, welcome back. Hope everyone had a nice lunch. We had a nice celebration of Maddie Simon's career as a professor for 20 years in the architecture program. Maddie's retiring at the end of this semester. Um, Maddie's on the panel again this afternoon with Ashraf Salama. He's professor of architecture and urbanism and head of the Department of Architecture and the Built Environment at the University of Northumbria, Newcastle. We're also joined by Gabriella Canamar Clark, a landscape architect and partner at Land Design, and Denny Ruggieri from the landscape architecture department here. He's an architect and associate professor. Welcome. We have 3 projects this afternoon, and Carolyn Sewell is going to get us started and take us back to the North America and DC. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Hello, my name is Caroline Sewell, and this is my project, Readapting the Past, Reviving Community Within DC Chinatown. I first off want to thank my chair and my committee for guiding me through all of this thesis semester and year in general, so thank you so much for them. And this is my project. So just to start off with some context about the presentation, we're going to go over history and problems with Chinatown, DC, my question and solution, site analysis perspective in the life of the site, part T, and the design. So to start off, to fully understand the issues of Chinatowns, we first have to look at the histories within these Chinatowns and Chinese immigrants. And so Chinatowns became sort of multicultural and adaptations to the changes of for Chinese immigrants. So there's no single story within Chinatowns that follow each other, and they span throughout the United States with different beginnings. Some of the most early Chinatowns are located at the same places where Chinese laborers worked, and early Chinatowns serve as vital social and economic support networks for these Chinese laborers and Chinese immigrants. So this is sort of a timeline of different United States legislation and major moments that prohibited the rights and immigration of Chinese people. So it kind of puts in perspective of how important and relevant Chinatowns are for Chinese immigrants. So just to zone in DC in general, the first DC's first Chinatown was established in the 1980s, and in the 1930s, Chinatown, DC was forced to relocate due to federal development. It was moved to Federal Triangle, and then it was also moved again to where it is now around 8th Street and between 6th and 7th Streets. And it's the Chinatown we see today. Before then, there were German settlers known to settle in the area, which resulted in different types of architectural styles we see in the area as well, not just Chinese motifs of architecture. So some of the current problems with Chinatowns is that there's a dramatic decline in Asian American population in Chinatowns, resulting in the decline of legacy restaurants and legacy businesses in the area. So, and the fleeing population is often due to Asian Americans' desire to own property in the suburbs. So a lot of Chinese immigrants and Asian American immigrants in general often want an American dream, so to say, and want to own property and own land. So they move to suburbia to do that, which is very hard to do in DC, as we know. So these are 2 images of, believe it or not, the same site. And so the image, on the right is what it is today. And the image on the left is from 1965. This picture right here, this building, is the same building on the right side, as we can see, having major development and major high-rise development in the area surrounding it. So kind of diminishing the characteristics of Chinatown. So that leads me to my question here. How can historic Chinatowns preserve their cultural identity in the midst of displacement within their communities? And through that, I formed a program that centers community remembrance and revival within program spaces through a museum and a community center. So just to take a closer look at DC Chinatown, through analysis and research, I discovered that DC Chinatown is very fragmented, even through the planning of the community. So these two images kind of cite where the borders are for Chinatown Design Review versus Chinatown Historic District, that both of them being very different from each other. And so resulting in a very different urbanistic view of how Chinatown is viewed within the context and the different design renovations that go inside this area. So there's no clear boundary of where the Chinatown, DC Chinatown is. So it's very confusing. So through that, I focus on two kind of plots of land and sites. So I focus on Chinatown Park and then this alleyway development that leads to the gateway. And so you can see that through there. And so with that, I want to kind of take you through an experience of people going through Chinatown today and seeing how disfragmented it is. So through the Chinatown gate, we can see different motifs of Chinese architecture within Chinatown, as well as different high rises around the area. And so turning along 6th Street Northwest, we can see different motifs of Chinese characteristics that the DC Planning Board has attempted to make for Chinatown community, with Chinese characters being on different signages and just not really focusing on community, as just more along the lines of focusing on how to approve of planning board characteristics of having these Chinese characters in different sites. So going to Chinatown Park, we can see that this park is very underutilized. There's not that much really going on in the park. There are a few chairs and tables, but that's about it. The park is mostly used for the Lunar New Year event, but that's about it. That's all the events that they hold at the park. And so kind of turning towards my design, this is my proposed plan for it. So the Part T explores on an experience through DC Chinatown that enriches the community, while also educating those around the history and how DC Chinatown came to be. The journey and path starts with the Chinatown gates with different, let me go over here, with different road materials leading through this path that I intend to make, and then with also different sidewalk materials as well to entice this path throughout from the gateway throughout this alleyway right here and then towards the park. And so through this materiality, when you go through the alleyway, it's also enticed through a miniature archway as well. And then we can see different outdoor food vendors where the community center lays along the alleyway. And then so the community center revolves around the event space and the different outdoor vendors. I created the outdoor vendor space due to the lack of Chinese American businesses that are in Chinatown, DC right now. So, right, this sort of entices people more along the lines of business owners to come back to Chinatown and try to create more business and revive some community through food, through this community center. And also, I have an event space there to also promote the community center aspect. And so walking along the streets towards the Chinatown Park, we can see the materiality continues along here and continues all the way to the park. And the park is the main museum space for the Chinatown community. So within the museum holds different stories and voices within Chinese immigrants and Chinese people. And so through this architecture, I did mass timber for the architecture and to promote different historical Chinese architecture as well. And so in the museum, we can see it's a very temple-like structure. And so I also did that through Chinese precedents and temple-like structure. And so we can see here the main floor is mostly just the lobby space. And then when going down, it's more of a vaulted ceiling aspect, and then the exhibit spaces as well. And we can also see in the community center space, the event space and the up above space too. So. Thank you.
Please use the microphone, guests, so that the folks in the back and online can hear your comments.
Carolyn, thanks for taking us to a part of town that I can say that I've always wanted to know more about. And now I'm I'm interested in your project. I appreciate the way you've created a route to help us to experience Chinatown. And there are some things I'm curious about. I've always been curious about that gate and to what extent it was a kind of Hollywood version of Chinese architecture and to what extent there was anything traditional about it. And so I would absolutely love to see precedents that you were relying on as you were creating your contemporary expression of Chinese architecture. I know there's some absolutely, fantastically exciting architecture going on in China now. And, so I would love to see the traditional as well as the contemporary precedents that you've studied. The other thing is I find the food market really interesting, and it makes me think about the tradition of night markets. And so I wonder if that's, what you had in mind to introduce not just the food, but the kind of cultural experience of coming together as community and partaking of the food and the nighttime aspect, which I think is important for Chinatown because I think, you know, bringing people into downtown at night is a gift to DC.
Mhm.
So I think, I guess I'm looking for just a little bit more information by which to evaluate your project.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am right now. I
Mhm.
can appreciate it. You know, I can really enjoy
Mhm.
looking at the architecture, but in order to critique it, I want to have I want to have a little bit of an education
Mhm.
in where the project is coming from in terms of the architecture itself.
Yeah, so when looking along like different sites within DC Chinatown, because I know that I always wanted to do the site in DC Chinatown because of how fragmented and discontinuous this Chinatown specifically is, and so close to UMD as well. It was just a perfect opportunity to explore it. When looking at the different sites and different belonging of like where the architecture is going to go. Um, I picked the Chinatown Park and this alleyway because I saw opportunities to kind of create this path towards the gate. And as you said, the gate is more along the lines of more of a commercial aspect of like what Chinatown is supposed to be. But I feel like the gate is kind of more of a representation of like where Chinatown is and the sort sense of place for Chinatown. Because it's so discombobulated, it's kind of sets a press like a place factor for the area. And so I kind of want to focus on that as well. And so I saw a great opportunity for this alleyway being here because um, there's also a food vendor place here as well. And it's very underutilized and very just there and just not really doing a lot for the community too. So I saw ways of having the food market here and also forgot to mention this, but also having opportunities of maybe creating a larger expansion of the outdoor food vendors along this building here and possibly along the other building here as well. So I kind of wanted to explore that aspect of like maybe this is more of an expansion of like what Chinatown could be through food vendors, and through more increase of business for the community too. And so that's kind of what I was trying to reach at for through the community center and through the also the event space as well, because the event space I know I talked to someone in the 1882 Foundation, and that foundation is a very it's a community center in not community center, but it is a community group in Chinatown, DC, that specializes in preservation of Chinese history for DC. So they always say along the lines of like event spaces, we don't really have like a major event space. The community center that is in Chinatown isn't really used that often because it is in this large block right here. And so it was more along the lines of an opportunity to create more spaces that Chinese people and just people in the Chinatown DC community can use as well. So
You know, I just want to make one more comment.
Yeah.
I think that your idea of developing the alley is a very DC concept. And I think that's important to point out, that you're taking something local from DC and you're infusing it with the Chinese experience. So I think you've got a lot going on in this project that makes a lot of sense. Also, the idea of the park activation. You know, it's an old park. People have new ideas about what goes on in parks, and you're making it happen there. So I think you're taking two interesting urban types, connecting them with this route, and you know, you're then developing them with your ideas, with the history, with the cultural preservation that, you know, that it's your interest here.
Yep.
Sure.
Hello.
Thank you very much for your presentation and the comprehensive project. I'm having a number of questions regarding the context and regarding the project itself. The Chinese or Chinatowns, or the phenomenon of Chinatowns.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to look at the differences? Why we see Chinatown in many European, North American cities, but we don't see, for example, India Town, Thai Town,
Mhm.
or something else?
Yes.
So what is that?
Well, Chinese laborers came, immigrated from China to America way before different ethnic groups from East China came over. So that's also a reason. I also think that because of the different legislation that Chinese people face in the United States especially, prohibited a lot of immigration. So it didn't entice people to immigrate to the United States and form Chinatown communities. I think Chinese laborers really wanted a place to kind of just like be themselves and have a sort of community within the cities where they were working at. So I think that is why.
Mhm. Okay. Would have really been interesting to see, for example, why this phenomenon doesn't exist with other, I'm talking about the social dimension of it.
Okay.
Because the social dimension and the economic dimension too
Mhm.
would be interesting to look at. So
Mhm.
now, with your project, are you speaking exclusively to the Chinese community, or in this, the
Mhm.
alley upgrade and the park?
Mhm.
So, or what?
I think originally I was thinking more along the lines of trying to entice Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants to come back to DC as a way to form more localized businesses throughout this alleyway. But it could also be open to a lot of other different Asian American food options as well. I think that because we see a lot of like fusion Asian food, especially in DC around here, I think it'll be a great opportunity to just not have just one type of thing. It could have multiple types of
So you would
Of it.
encourage that through land use and
Mhm.
through diversity of activities?
yes.
So the issue of access and equity is looked at. Did you look at?
Um not too closely, no.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, so another point is about, I
Yep.
can see details in
Mhm.
the sections, and like you went deeply
Hmm.
into the details and how these details. Sorry. Okay. How these details
Yep.
emerged out of your ideas.
Yeah.
Were they integrated with your ideas, or again, and we had
Mhm.
this question earlier, were they resolved after you developed the form?
Yeah, no problem. So the first floor is mostly just dedicated towards the outdoor vendor space. I incorporated a collaborative kitchen inside through this this wall, the collaborative kitchen. And so the first floor is mostly just dedicated towards the outdoor vendor people. And then going towards the second floor is more along the lines of event space and people that if they don't want to sit like stand outside the alleyway, they could have opportunities to come to the event space that is on the second floor. And going up the stairs, we noticed that the event space is double heighted as well as an open office space for people managing the outdoor vendors as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
What about the technological dimensions,
Yeah.
structural dimensions?
So I incorporated mass timber to the project, and I noticed through a lot of Chinese architecture, especially modern Chinese architecture, um, they incorporate a lot of layered roof types. And so I wanted to kind of create this layered roof that kind of resonates to the museum space as well, with a layered roof too, as we can see in the elevation.
Okay.
So yeah.
Now, sorry, I'm having too many questions about this project. So designing a museum in this context or developing a museum in this context, how did you come up with the need for a museum?
So the museum was in need of more historical representation for DC Chinatown. I notice in a lot of other Chinatowns there are like museum spaces dedicated for history of different other Chinatowns. Uh, um, and so I notice DC Chinatown does not have that and doesn't have the representation of where Chinese immigrants first came from and first were displaced and everything. So especially with this Chinatown, it's super interesting because they have been displaced twice. And so it's been a struggle for the community to stay relevant, especially in terms of staying relevant towards the city as
Okay.
well. So I think having the museum kind of sets a stamp for this is where Chinatown is, especially because you can see here, the museum runs across from Massachusetts Avenue. Massachusetts Avenue is a major road in DC, as we all know, and holds a lot of monuments there as well. So it's a major road, and kind of this museum kind of symbolizes a stamp of this is where Chinatown is, and that's it.
So it's developing a sense of identity, a
in place.
sense of attachment, sense of, okay. All right, I have a couple of other questions, but we'll go.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the level of detail you put into it. I'm a landscape architect, so I will pivot a little bit into the public open space and the public realm. I actually was there last weekend. I took a friend to the National Building Museum, and we took this stop, and we had dumplings across the street, just off that first page. And you're right, a lot of the attraction to places like this could be through food, but food is a vehicle to engaging. It could be food, it could be social activities, cultural activities. You mentioned the Lunar Year being celebrated at the park. That is the only event that has formality. I can imagine that day to day, probably there's people enjoying a moment in the shade of the trees. What I wanted to highlight is that in what it struck me, especially in your diagram here and your connection through, my first question was the alley and selecting the alley, but I can see that little gate. It gave you a cue, it's already giving people a cue to come through. In the history of DC, we have plenty of alleys that have been reinvigorated, and it's a great DC vocabulary. Georgetown has Katie's Alley, and it's been reinvented many, many times, and it's fabulous. The only way that alleys are safe and attractive to pedestrians, whether you're a local or a visitor, is whether they feel safe. By activation, soup to nuts, the way you've done it or the way you think about it, that's the way people will feel safe going through a very intimate space. What I like about this diagram that you have is that you've tackled, in my profession, we talk about when you solve a problem from the open space for the locals, then you're solving it for the tourists. You solve for the locals, then your tourists will come. In this case, I think, in my opinion, you're solving for the local identity with the community center, something that is not there, something that will give people that sense of belonging and community. And those 300 people that live here right now, or 5 years ago, I don't know if they're more or less. Your data is already like a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so who knows if it's still in decline or if it's coming back around.
Most just to
Yeah.
go off that point, most of the Chinese population that live in DC Chinatown currently is as we talked about, the elderly population that live in the Joy Luck Club.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And so, but however, we cannot help the forces of the market, right? In the
Yeah.
financial markets, and there are so many other forces that shape our neighborhoods.
Mhm.
The value of the land, it's expensive, and small businesses all of a sudden have struggle. And so that is, one project cannot solve for all. However, if we can find ways to strengthen some of these connections, because like I said, I was going to say the community center seems to be solving for the need of belonging and connection for the local population, whether you're Asian or Asian. I mean, I identify, I'm part of DC. I love the multiculturalism we have in the city. So if I had dumplings with a friend, I just love that experience. The community center or the museum is for everybody, but it would be probably first and foremost for tourists. So you have the connection of the two. You have the connection of the local community, and then you have the connection of the tourists that come once a year or once in a blue moon, but they have a place that can come and not by hook or crook and just hoping to have something. There is all organized. It has an in or outdoor component. So you have an opportunity for that lunar year to be celebrated, but hopefully many other more celebrations are probably lacking and even desirable from that perspective. So I like the idea that you made that connection and that sort of duplicity of the project. And the other piece is when you connect spaces like you've done, I mean, we show them as dash lines here, but if you've been to Boston, the Heritage Trail is a series of connections of alleys and crooks, and you go to big spaces to small spaces, and people can choose to experience it all or in pieces and take the time to digest all the way to I love your board here, and it's a beginning of a concept, but I can see that you started thinking about your materials and what is that tactile experience, and why you even call it a brocade. That's a textile Chinese, like that kind of. So to me, that connection starts to seep through from the big idea to the detail. So I applaud that. I think there's a fair amount to study from the transportation's perspective. Massachusetts Avenue has a great exposure to just sort of be an urban design statement, right? And that we call it the pork shop, right? We've studied this park before, and there's a series of bus stops, and it's a busy intersection. So eventually, if you think about ways for people, and I can see your crosswalks being delineated in a much more bold, more very deliberate and legible, I think that would encourage people to come through that. And I think the scale, lastly, going from expansive to intimate, and then making people feel safe from place to place. That's how we entice people to come. There's in retail, there is this model where every 50 feet or every 100 feet, you offer people something else to entice them to come and experience. So what is that? Is it a monument? Is it a sign? Is it a historic marker? Is it another amenity? And you started with food, but it could be multi-pronged, many aspects, multi-use.
Yep.
So I think my comment is less of a question, more of a reflection. But if you think about, I was going to pivot to the museum, but not the materials, but the space itself. And what are you thinking? Because I think it's very transparent, and it's almost like the park wants to speak through. What kinds of activities were you envisioning for that type of building you envisioned? Sorry about that.
For the museum, I was more along the lines of envisioning a space where anyone could go into, especially for the park area above, a space where anyone could be involved in. And I noticed when I was standing in the park, the lack of seating, the lack of trees, the lack of a lot of things. So I think this perspective kind of highlights a lot more of like what I was envisioning with it. Having these uprooted light wells that go into the museum, provide light towards the museum space, as you can see in this section here. Kind of more along the lines creates an opportunity for more seating and more chances of community aspects. I feel like Chinatown just lacks the sense of place and community. So having that space dedicated to that is really good opportunity.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think thank you for a very interesting
you.
sort of thesis, a great topic. I think one of my questions is related to analysis. You showed a figure ground, and practically that's all, no? I mean, like that you showed in your presentation,
Yeah,
but
so,
one of the things that I kind of was struck is your idea of how fragmented it is. When you look at those two figure grounds and the overlays that you put in the first one at the top is not fragmented at all. In fact, this is how politics probably and local politics consider Chinatown. Very discrete, self-contained sort of unit.
mhm,
When you look at the historic district, I assume that has to do with properties maybe and who owns the properties. That is really interesting, that diagram. So that kind of made me think, well, maybe there's something to do with zoning, land use, properties. And I'd like to see maybe a little analysis of the Sanborn map, or maybe even looking at current property sort of patterns, because I think that could yield a very interesting sort of maybe fragmentation is not something you should fight. Maybe it's something you want to adopt. And thinking about, how diffused this Chinatown is. And I think one of the strategies, it was probably a strategy for survival, the diffusion and fragmentation within a context that, if you look at the figure grounds, those massive buildings don't allow cultural expression other than top-down cultural expression. So in a way, the problem that you identified, to me, that would have been also an interesting solution. And you moved in the direction of kind of adopting a solution but I feel like it's not fragmented enough. If you ask me, I would have liked to see more of that. I'm thinking like Kowloon City. Have you heard of that? In Hong Kong, it was this big kind of dense thing where things were happening at all sort of levels, like first floor, second floor.
Yep.
There were dentist office at the top. So if you had actually cut sections through this fabric, perhaps we would have seen this fragmentation more as a unifying sort of element and thread that runs from the ground floor into the buildings, around the buildings, in the back, to the roof. And that's where, so that's one thing that, maybe what you see as a problem sometimes, if you analyze it and if you look deeper, it could become an opportunity.
Okay.
And the last thing is, the park, I like that you chose like park, museum, community center, but I was thinking about the things that support daily sort of culture, daily community. The housing here, you kind of pointed until you told me that it was there, and she mentioned it briefly. I know I drove through it. I didn't know that was housing. So why wouldn't that be considered part of your story? And maybe housing, and this diffused housing might be part of that story, so that then your museum is not just kind of another fragment in this kind of, long history of fragmentation, but it becomes a tassel in a mosaic of kind of very rich, sort of nicely interconnected culture. So thinking about perhaps even some of the vacant buildings, I drive through this because the Italian church is not far. It's Italians and Chinese communities always kind of side by side for some reason. Maybe there's something about it. But I feel like you see a lot of the vacancies of the bad planning, or the planning that was maybe the bad economics, more than the bad planning that happened in this area. Why not reuse some of these? Or what would be the strategy to reuse it, to reappropriate this Chinatown, but this time within a modern building, within an existing building? So I feel like, very good presentation, I think. And the last thing is, the party shows kind of this very articulate, and more than one space. But when I look at that illustration, I don't see the arrow sort of playing out, or the red, or the crossings. So I feel like maybe a little bit of a gesture to, maybe connect that, a visual way to connect this.
Yeah.
But then I think also the whiteness of these kind of, blockly buildings, if you were to carve out the Asian properties, the Asian-owned properties,
Yeah.
you might find that it's not so fragmented after all, and maybe that there's still kind of an element of community presence that you could then leverage with new kind of reinvestment. So that's my only suggestion for you.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to talk about the architecture itself just for a moment. So I'm seeing this interesting contrast between what it's like to inhabit the underground and what it's like to inhabit the area or park area. And I'm not seeing quite as much about what that alley is like. And I feel like I'd like to see a little bit more about that.
Okay,
But going back to this underground and above ground,
yes.
I think that you could, moving forward in your career, do more to think about what that underground space is like tectonically.
Mhm.
You've got these big, heavy roof arches, but they're coming down on these, what looks like slim columns.
Mhm.
And I would like to see a greater sense of mass.
Okay, yeah.
You want to feel like the building's gonna
Mhm.
hold up and not come crashing down on you. I think it's that space. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah,
agree.
I feel like that roof is or ceiling is awfully precarious.
Okay.
It's cantilevering out. It's got these bricks. I don't know why the bricks aren't going to fall on me. So I feel like you could investigate more what this underground realm is like. And then when you cut out for the light coming in, that's really special. It's a real kind of experience. The other thing, it's just another little hint about how you're making the structure. Those trees ought to be aligning with the structure. You can't plant big trees anywhere when you design a park on top of a building. So the trees could support your concept, right, by being part of the structural concept. And then when you come up above ground, so you've related the two structurally, that's perfect. But because you gave us that big structural detail there, now I'm looking for it in the renderings. I want to see, how does this play out? Because this is an architecture where joints are articulated by essentially jewelry, right? Pieces don't just come together of their own accord, but they're joined by a third party. And so we're not seeing that in the renderings. It's looking seamless. It's not looking so much like wood construction.
Yeah.
So, you've got it right there. And the kind of next progression is to really get it over there. Like, what does it look like when you make these connections that are supported by steel?
Yeah.
Right? How do the wood and the steel come together? And also just things like how does this you told us you're using mass timber construction, right? So can you cantilever with it? How does that work out? I'm always fascinated to look at sections, and looking at the community center section. I'm just kind of wondering about what about that makes us know it's a mass timber building, right? How, you know, where, where's this kind of chunky structure that's supporting these panels? So I think, you've got such a rich project here. There's so much going on, historically, socially, tying the past into the future, so many interesting ideas, so many interesting program ideas. And I think this concept of food as being a major force is really, it's both appropriate for a downtown. It's also culturally appropriate. And I think it might be a kind of a draw for a young Asian American population to say, hey, I'm going to live here where the food I really enjoy is part of the social life. So, so much going on in all these aspects. And I think as you move forward, push the architecture, get the precedents, really, really think about rendering the actual way it comes together and is held together and, comes down underground and all that good architecture stuff.
Thank you so much.
You want to talk?
You really do?
Okay.
Here you go, Don.
Thank you, sir. Great project, Caroline. I really am impressed with the way you've tackled this difficult question of communities that don't have a physical there any longer, and how do we remember, right? So that sense of remembering. And in a way, you could have maybe captured that question of displacement and done a little bit more with that. I think maybe you undersold that, because this is a community that keeps getting bumped, right?
Yeah.
From one place to another, none of which they actually built themselves, right? So you could even change the title, instead of readopting, replacing the past, not displacing the past, I think, because your project is about regrowing a community, right? And regrowing that memory. So I think it's a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Joseph. Then I'll wrap things up for us.
A quick follow-up to Don's points. Really interesting project, Caroline. You mentioned your involvement with historic preservation efforts in Chinatown and the effort to identify landmark buildings that could be safeguarded. I wonder if in a second iteration of this, you might consider wrapping those monuments that do give a sense of place to old Chinatown into this design vision.
Yeah. Thank you.
So as you've gotten aware of this, it's the tradition of the chair to bring things to closure. And I wanted to say that with Caroline's thesis that first of all, I'll recognize her committee, it wasn't recognized at the beginning, is Don Linebaugh, Brittany Williams, and myself as the chair. I think one of the things that came up, and Don alluded to, is that Chinatown in DC has had multiple locations. This is the most recent one. It originally started where the National Gallery was, kind of at the foot of Capitol Hill. It progressed into the area where eventually the development for the Federal Triangle took place. So that was probably when Dan Burnham and company were, along with Charlie McKim, were looking at DC. They saw that as a point of opportunity to evict the Chinese, to move them elsewhere. And then finally to this location here. So it is often a situation of inherited architecture, not architecture created afresh. Consequently, the building you showed us, which has a kind of pastiche of Chinese motifs on it, rather than being authentically Chinese in terms of its architecture. Kind of like Trump's Oval Office, except Trump ought to know better. But interestingly enough, in San Francisco, you can walk down one street and there's Italian-American motifs glued onto a kind of generic party wall American utilitarian building. And then on the next street over, there's Chinese motifs onto the building. And in my mind, someplace in the middle, there's a kind of multi-ethnic kitchen discussing how noodles ought to be made in the middle of all that. Hey, look, this has been really a wonderful opportunity. Oh, the other thing I was going to say was that you can't discount how bad the arena has been to this current Chinatown. The promise was the arena was going to redeem Chinatown, and it did completely the opposite of that. It turned its face south. It also has that convenient entrance that we've all used, where you come off of the metro and go directly into the arena, and then you don't hang around at all. You get back on the metro, so there's no opportunity for spinoff. And then on the north side, someplace down here, the north side of the arena, you go into a kind of dreadful mall that never connects back to Chinatown. So it really is it's something that might be able to help in the future to look at for a future thesis project. Look, Caroline, this is my first opportunity to work with you. I've really enjoyed working with you over the course of this semester. I spent, as disclosure here, I spent the better part of January in Japan. And so I constantly told Caroline stories about the vitality of street food, street markets, as well as traditional Eastern building techniques and types, much of which was influenced by China. And she endured my storytelling. Thank you, bravo, that was really great. So Caroline is the final thesis student whose committee I will chair, as I am going to be following Maddie down the road of retirement next year at this time. And so over the course of the semester, Caroline overcame many challenges, some of her own making, but others that were assigned to issues that are systemic faults of our thesis program. And we might want to talk about those for a moment. Since the last 45 minutes, we've talked about your project. And I'd like to focus on those. The observations I have are based not only on Caroline's thesis, but on my participation in over 275 theses, being a committee member in over 275 theses in my nearly 40 years here at Maryland. It's time to go, I'll tell you that, at Maryland. And number one, there's just 4 points. I'll make them really quick, and you might want to think about them. Students and faculty alike might want to think about these things. Number one, pro-thesis, there seems to be an overemphasis on program and insufficient emphasis on site or context. That is, a building might be site generated and a program might be part of the design process, not something that comes a priori. That you might seek a program by messing with the site. And I don't see that happen very often. We did that this semester. You and I did that together, and that was kind of fun, but it was hair-raising at points in time, right? Yeah. At the very least, we should understand program in relationship to the carrying capacity of site. That is, so that at the very least, equal attention is paid to the site and program at the same time, and that we don't try to overload a site with all the program. This is where all of this program initially was going to be accommodated on this site. And we had to think of some other way to move things around a little bit to make this work. The program isn't a holy grail. And since good buildings tend to outlive their initial uses, or so Matt Bell always tells me, I place more emphasis on form and type and context. So that's one prejudice I have. And you and I have discussed this over the course of the semester. Any student beginning the thesis semester needs to have their site fully documented. And that is, you need to have base drawings, models, digital models, and this includes the context of existing buildings and artifacts, particularly for someone who endeavors to make a historic preservation proposition. And that we had to work on a lot this semester.
Yes.
And that, in the end, I think a lot of the questions about this and about the nature of the structure come from a compression of time. So the base drawings and base models need to come before the design process. The third thing is there's insufficient understanding on the part of students regarding first sources. That is, many students find contemporary precedents, but very few sufficiently go back to original sources. This is particularly important for any thesis that seeks to respond to regional or historic traditions. Like people, I've never fully trusted a precedent that is less than 30 years old. Sorry about that. Le Corbusier drew the Parthenon and translated it into modern architecture. So that is, that is a profound invention, much more profound than simply aping a contemporary who aped Le Corbusier. After all, Le Corbusier told us, history has not soiled our hands, it has filled them. I would rather wash my hands than having them cut off. He actually said that. And finally, I would say that the unquestioned faith in the redemptive power of the computer is, to me, unsettling. In general, I have issues with all kinds of uncritical faith of all kinds, but I am troubled that the preoccupation with the mastery of digital media has resulted in too little attention being paid to architecture and architectural skills. Our students don't draw or model physically as much as they should. Architectural elements have devolved into a set of digital parts warehouse that are brought uncritically into any design. And we need to use all of the tools in the toolbox. Computers are the newest addition to that toolbox, and they've only been here for about 30 years. And we've been making architecture for perhaps 5,000 years. So as they say, quote, ad demonstratum, or QED, as they always say in the physics department. Maybe we all want to think about all the tools we have. Finally, Caroline, thank you for a memorable experience and to a conclusion of both of our thesis careers.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to take a short break and pivot to this wall and get started at the top of the hour. Thank you. Hello, Lauren McNamara is going to be the next thesis candidate to present. And her thesis was chaired by Andressa Martinez. And also on the committee were Britt Williams and Georgianne Matthews.
Hi, as we begin, I wanted to thank the jury for being here, thank my chair, Andressa Martinez, as well as the rest of my committee, and also friends and family for being here. So my name is Lauren McNamara, and I will be presenting my thesis, Rebuilding Home, Exploring the Role of Reuse in Revitalizing Vacant Neighborhoods. So to begin with the problem, currently in Baltimore, over 12,000 buildings are vacant, many of which are row houses. This is in part due to Baltimore's population declining since the 1960s. Currently, the city's method of remediating vacancy is mainly demolition. This leaves missing teeth or areas where empty lots break the street wall. However, in 2024, the population increased for the first time in 10 years. As architects, we have the opportunity to rebuild Baltimore while using the historic fabric of the city and reusing row homes. Looking at some historic photos of row homes, we can examine some of the historic character that still exists today, such as the historic marble stoops, corner stores, and intricate brick detailing. Neighborhoods were very proud of these houses and took a lot of care in maintaining them. Historic drivers of vacancy include redlining, racial zoning ordinances, which prevented people in neighborhoods deemed unsafe, typically in minority communities, from getting mortgages. Then in the 1970s, some of these areas were injured a second time with urban renewal, which went through and demolished houses in many areas that had been previously deemed unsafe. Looking at the map on the right, the purple dots represent the currently vacant buildings in Baltimore, overlaid with a map of redlining. So currently we can see there's still a strong correlation. Many redline neighborhoods still lack green spaces, amenities, and are disproportionately vacant. The cycle of vacancy typically occurs when one homeowner is not able to afford their mortgage and leaves their property vacant. As other neighbors begin to notice this and feel like the neighborhood is trending downwards, they begin to move, reducing the tax base and leading to disinvestment in the community. As the city then buys the properties that are vacant, it demolishes those in poor condition, leaving behind single row houses, which then need to be structurally repaired. Typically, those houses then fall into disrepair as well. This leaves houses in states like this, which are deteriorated, but still retain many historic characteristics. They have varying levels of decay, some needing minimal renovation to be habitable, but others missing entire roofs and floor plates with vegetation growing within. However, we can still see that many parts of these are salvageable. This leads to my thesis question: what is the role of reuse in the revitalization of vacant neighborhoods? And how can this adaptation be applied across the row house typology and throughout a whole block? So benefits of adaptive reuse, as opposed to just demolishing and rebuilding new, include sustainability, as the most sustainable building is the one that's already built, preserving communities that do still exist in these areas, giving neighbors a sense of ownership over their community, and also retaining Baltimore's iconic city fabric. Most importantly for this thesis, we have the opportunity to adapt the rigid row house typology into different housing types. Baltimore's row houses tend to all be of a similar size and square footage, creating a monolith of housing. As families grow and shrink, they cannot find larger or smaller houses in their neighborhood, forcing them to leave areas where they have put down roots. By adapting the row house typology, we can create more variety in housing, leading to more diverse, vibrant, and resilient neighborhoods. So this thesis will propose a system for creating new plans of existing row houses to design floor plan options for an entire block, which can be customized to fit individual families' needs as opposed to one individual house. So next we will go through the process of creating this system. With these requirements in mind, I explored different site options and landed on the neighborhood of Penn North in Baltimore. This is relevant historically as it is within the Pennsylvania Avenue Black Arts District, which recognizes the neighborhood's contribution, especially in the 40s and 50s in jazz music. It was historically redlined and currently suffers from neglect, disinvestment, and vacancy. Looking closer within the site, we can see that it sits within numerous city programs designed to incentivize investment by developers. So it sits within an impact investment areas, which lead to tax breaks for development in the area. It also sits within or next to a community development zone, which provides money from the city for neighbors to do work within the area. Looking more closely at the site, it's also close to new residential development within Reservoir Hill neighborhood. It's also close to Druid Lake, a library, and close by to Micah, so there are many students in the area. The site specifically sits on either side of Druid Hill Avenue. In this image, the red represents the vacant houses and the white are the occupied. It exists kind of on the edge of vacant to stable. As you go further west, it becomes more vacant. And we can also observe here how there are many conditions where multiple vacant row houses are next to each other, giving us the opportunity to combine row houses. Looking at the facade specifically, there are three main subsets within the block. All the vacant houses are 2 stories. Some have a front porch, some have a flat facade, and others have a swell front facade. So here's an example of the flat facade. In visiting the site, I noticed some characteristics that are typical of vacant neighborhoods, such as extremely fast street traffic due to the lack of pedestrians in the area. There's also not really green space and there's no street trees, which leaves the only space for neighbors to interact as the street, although it is kind of an unpleasant condition. So this thesis will address these by proposing a calm streetscape, creating a communal front porch for community members to interact in, a private retreat for the individual residences, as well as interwoven nature throughout, providing green space. So in order to create the system for row houses, I examined over 20 different row houses over the world and then looked more closely at 3 that fit the same dimensions as the Baltimore row house. In examining these, looking at the Baltimore typical plan, I noted that the main defining spatial drivers are the stairs and kitchen placement, which define the rest of the plan. And looking at Holland Estate by Atelier 5 in Switzerland, they use a perpendicular stair as opposed to Baltimore, which typically uses a parallel stair with the existing party wall. And finally, the Azuma House by Tado Ando introduces a new element of a central courtyard around which the other program elements are defined. Looking at all 3 of these houses, I noticed how they all follow a tripartite scheme. So despite how the program elements switch between the 3 parts, depending on which house, they all have about 3 equal parts. So to design my partie, I applied this 3-part scheme, but proposed demolishing the rear wall and then taking part of the backyard, which is currently mainly used for parking because it's on kind of an undesirable alley condition. So residents typically don't use it for green space. This also creates a consistent module size of 15 by 20 feet for each third, allowing us to systematize the plan options. So in this partie, we propose a courtyard space to replace the underutilized backyard, which can float and exist in any of the thirds, creating different plan options customizable for each family's needs. Then in developing a more comprehensive system, I applied the idea of shape grammar, which is a systematic rule-driven method that produces designs by transforming and manipulating geometric forms. Historically, this was used by designers like Palladio, who created rules for how walls were applied in the plan, as well as Alvaro Siza, who created rules based on circulation. So following this system through, we can begin to create one individual plan. We can first choose a third for the courtyard to occupy. And then after choosing, we can begin to apply vertical circulation, defining the other elements of the plan. After picking one of those, we can then begin to apply other fixed elements like plumbing components for kitchens and bathrooms. After choosing one of these, we can then apply the same considerations to the second floor plans to create a second floor based on each family's needs. Finally, we can then develop a completely fleshed out plan from following these components. In developing these plans, I went through many iterations and can just condense them into 21 different plan components, which will be called rules based on shape grammar. Firstly are the circulation-based rules defining vertical circulation with stair and ramp options. Next are the plumbing-based rules defining kitchens and restrooms. And lastly are partition-based rules, which define enclosed program elements like bedrooms, closets, and offices. So if we begin to apply these, by combining these, one row house can have 630 unique plan options. If we combine two row houses, we can create over 15,000 unique plan options. And finally, three row houses have over 64,000 plan options. Yeah, so I will not be sharing 64,000 plan options with you. But instead, I will be showing you 6 case study houses from these rules. So these houses use a single row house, 2 row houses, 3 and 4 row houses combined to create different plans. And looking in the site, they're informed by what this specific community needs. So I thought a lot about student housing and young professionals. Looking at case study house A, this is a single row house that is broken up into 2 units with a front courtyard for gathering space. This space is ideal for students as they're both 600 square feet, 1-bedroom apartments with a shared front courtyard for interacting, as well as additional greenery on the streetscape to create a calmer street experience. It also includes a new steel structure in the courtyard to support the existing historic masonry walls. And looking within the courtyard, it can create an oasis within the city. Case study house B combines 2 row houses into 1 multi-generational unit and has a front courtyard and a rear courtyard. On the first floor is a shared kitchen and living space for all, with a separate 1-bedroom apartment for other family members. And on the second floor, 3 bedrooms for other family members. So this creates a space that has options for both gathering and privacy, as well as green spaces. Next, House C combines 4 row houses and also introduces a new program element of commercial units. So this row house has a large central courtyard around which the other elements are located. So there are 2 commercial units on either side here, and 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom apartments above, making them ideal for young professionals who want access to amenities. And this takes a look through this building at this large shared courtyard for neighbors to gather in. And you can see the existing historic party walls as well, creating a sense of being within history as well. And this looks within the cafe commercial space out towards the courtyard. Case study house D is 1 row house, which is 1 unit, making it ideal for young families. It has the kitchen on the first floor and 2 bedrooms above, as well as the enclosed rear courtyard, making it a safe space for children to play. Case study house E is 2 row houses combined into 1 unit with a central courtyard, again, ideal for families, especially large families here with room to grow. And the central courtyard provides a place for gardening, for children to play, and for a break from the city. And then lastly, case study house F is 3 row houses combined, and again, has the commercial units. So 2 commercial units exist on the first floor with a central shared courtyard, and then 2 1-bedroom apartments above. And again, this makes it ideal for young professionals or students who would like access to those amenities. And looking through the site, we can also see the street level interventions, which include new bioswale zones and street trees, as well as wider sidewalks. So again, these buildings fill out the site, creating opportunities to rebuild Baltimore using the historic fabric of the city, creating spaces for new and existing residents. And this system proposes a way to diversify housing and introduce new commercial and gathering spaces, creating more diverse, vibrant, and resilient communities informed by their history instead of demolishing. So thank you. I would like to invite questions, and I also have some models, so you're invited to create your own floor plans with them. Fantastic.
A clarification question. So just to get a ballpark here, how do the unit sizes work? What's the range?
The units that I'm showing here, the apartments range from 600 to 1,200 square feet. And the houses are about 2,400.
Okay. Which is pretty much what that market's all about. I mean,
Yeah, I would say about like 12,000 is kind of typical.
and is it always the intention that you would make a street that would have a continuous street wall? In other words, I noticed you didn't do any types where there's a gap,
Yeah.
right? So always the idea is to go back and put the continuous street wall back.
Yeah, I would say all the interventions proposed here they still have the front facade existing, although the rear elements are typically more deteriorated. So I didn't propose anything that creates a new facade because in this site, the facades are all existing.
And the blue structures in there, you need to hold up the sidewalls
Yes.
there because typically when you tear a row house out between two other row houses, the sidewalls are not stable
Yes.
enough to stand on their own.
Yeah.
So but you could have done that with just adding a layer of brick wall, right?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you did the jungle gyms in there?
I thought so currently, when the city demolishes, they usually put up these kind of ugly CMU
Right,
block walls.
Arching on them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to propose an alternative to that.
Okay.
Point of clarification, and forgive me if I missed this because I walked in a few minutes late. Have you studied the orientation and have you done daylighting studies? Because obviously row houses are all about getting light in.
I did study them somewhat, and I deepened the courtyards in examples like in House C, where it's 2 row houses wide, so it's a little bit deeper and more able to get light. I would say if I was able to take more time, I definitely like to explore other blocks that may have other lighting opportunities.
I'm gonna start. I think it's a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate these models and just the thought and the process that went into just looking at so many different types and then the potential that they have to transform the neighborhood. So it's great. My studio a few semesters ago did a study of vacant lots from from a landscape architectural perspective, working with Danielle Bilot, who is the greening coordinator. And we were coming from the perspective that these vacant lots are actually good for Baltimore, in part because they offer services that are no longer offered by, they can offer access to open space, food security. In Plantation Park Heights, there's a brand new urban farm that is very active. So thinking about them and air quality, which in some of these neighborhoods, I don't know about Druid Hill, but it's kind of an emergency. So part of my question is, while I appreciate the focus on housing, which is really important, I feel like when you look at revitalizing a neighborhood, I mean, I'm thinking about all the other land uses that go into a neighborhood. So if you look at the neighborhood units, like 1920s diagram, it had a school, it had a little shopping at the corner, it had a gas station. So thinking about these, not just as kind of opportunities for housing, but also thinking about them as maybe churches, public spaces, community centers, maybe even food venues or like little like corner shops. So I mean, is there any of that in it? I feel like you kind of went in the direction of there's open space inside, and that might be the space that eventually one could turn into a public neighborhood type land use. Is that?
Yeah, I think I see the larger ones as being used by the general public, because those have the commercial on the first floor. So there's more opportunity for both residents and for visitors.
So
to
there
use
is a
space.
commercial land use.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. I
On-
missed that part.
yeah, just in two
Oh,
of these examples, there's commercial on the first floor.
Great. Well, the other question I have is sort of when you internalize all this kind of public life, of course, the street, while pleasant, might not get a whole lot of sort of foot traffic. And so have you thought about sort of the trade-off of like having internalized open space and all this kind of experience just like relegated within the walls of a building versus because you started with these pictures of old Baltimore with the stoop and the kind of public life that happened in the neighborhood there, but that was life as you show it there in the street. And I feel like, there's a trade-off, I think, or a little, something's gonna have to give. If you put the public life inside, you might end up with and what is the problem here? Is it the reuse of the buildings themselves or the vibrancy of the neighborhood that then can lead to those buildings being redesigned and reused? So I feel like that's the only thing that you're kind of walking a fine line between sort of revitalizing and perhaps like, internalizing that revitalization, which I think we tried before. It has been tried before, and it's not always 100% successful. But the presentation and the way you went about it, and even the graphics are just like convincing. They're so convincing that may make me fear that that street might not, be so successful after.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. First, though, I do want to say I so admire your very systematic approach and your really kind of broad vision here, because this could just apply across Baltimore. It could apply across so many cities. So it's a very comprehensive vision. And so now I'm going to just pick at a few things. One is Professor Ruggieri already talked about the street life and how important those stoops were. And so I want to talk about the alleys. Alleys are great places. You dismissed them quickly that they had like garbagey uses, but alleys can get cleaned up. And it seems to me that traditionally kids would go out the back, or families would go out the back, tenants would go out the back and have that private space. The stoop was for interacting with your neighbors in a kind of public way. You could have a private space in back, but you could also have a public space because, you could put a basketball hoop in the alley and kids would come and they'd all play and so forth. And often there were garages that could get turned into offices or shops or something like that. So I think you're potentially missing out on a rich alley culture.
Yeah.
And just a couple other things. One is there's a very lovely spaciousness to these proposals. And I do understand that these houses in Baltimore are vacant. Their value is probably very low. So maybe you can afford all that space. But I'm thinking if this was New York City, there'd be people living in that half below grade space, and you would want to be thinking about how you get people down there and make it gracious and get them up into the back garden. You'd be thinking more about packing in more people into the houses, and that's why that backyard, I think, then becomes very valuable. I really do want to appreciate your thinking about multi-generational living. I think that's just absolutely tremendously important. just one more thought. Yeah, and back to the streets for a sec, the idea of planting the streets so they become humane, cooled spaces,
Mhm.
very important in this warming world. Yeah, okay. So the other thought was, it seems to me an important precedent for Baltimore is Detroit,
Yeah.
where also many vacant houses have been knocked down, but there has been some adaptive reuse of some of those buildings with interesting uses. Like there's a music house where kids come for music lessons, musicians come to jam. There's a squash house, which is crazy because they created a squash court in there and they also planted squash. So it's like everything squash. So it is kind of an opportunity to get some unusual
Mhm.
uses which do help help to bring life to the neighborhood and also make sure that maybe there is activity out on the street at night as well as during the day. So tremendous applause for this really big vision. And I think if you would layer onto it, you might think about what does a good neighborhood look like,
Mhm.
and how do you then plan for, there are neighborhoods where there's a commercial space on every ground floor corner. So
Mhm.
there's the grocery store, the coffee shop, the ice cream shop, the bar.
Yeah.
So it's part of that, I'm sorry, neighborhood pattern. Thank you. That integrates commercial with residential uses. And yeah, just one more thing. And the other is, if you're going to not have these cutouts in the building, then you have to think about exploring the typology where that internal room gets a light well so
Mhm.
that you can bring light and air, but still have another habitable space.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm very excited by your project, and I think it's got, tremendous potential for continuing exploration and, implementing. Go buy yourself some, go buy a block in Baltimore if you can.
Yes.
If they're selling the houses for $1
Yeah.
each.
Just like you
And
bought your place in College Park years ago, right?
yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Um, I love your presentation. Thank you. I have few reactions. The fact that you took the time to develop this toolkit in a methodical manner. We talk about toolkits all the time, and in my profession, I'm architect and landscape architect. Tools in the toolkit. What do you have to create a better street? Trees, places to sit, people watching makes a neighborhood safe, all those things. So the fact that you approach this from a toolkit point of view where you have parts that you can put together, and the fact that you even on vertical circulation, you even considered disability, Americans with Disabilities Act standards, that's commendable, because I think the multi-generational aspects of your housing is going to have to incorporate that for aging members of a family. To me, in your one of the first slides, when you presented the advantages of adaptive reuse, the sustainability part and the sense of belonging and some of the other aspects, I think the cost of adaptive reuse from the financing perspective, and this is just my world, I'm going to share my 2 cents, is easier to finance these days something that's already partially built than new cash flow from people that lend money to do projects like this, provided that it's not completely crumbling, right? That infrastructure is there and is solid. And so an adaptive reuse can be put into action faster than a ground up development. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's another advantage of a project like this, that it could be creating residential solutions for people in need sooner than getting approvals on a rezoning, which lasts, I don't know how long these days in these jurisdictions, a year, 2, 3. And then there is a construction, which is you can be 5 years, 6 years before you even see a unit build. So that's one thing that I wanted to recognize on your project, the toolkit piece. From the landscape perspective, I think that notion of having this part, the open space in the unit as part of that toolkit, front yard, backyard, both central, it's fabulous. And I think that there is you see it in Europe when you have central courtyards where they help cool the air by, when you look at the circulation and how like they kind of suck the warm air and they kind of throw it up in the sky. So this already incorporates principles of vernacular architecture that we're not applying into architecture anymore for cooling and heating and other stuff. So that's a byproduct of your study, which I think is great. And people can apply to those. And I would imagine from the point you were making earlier that maybe sometimes like the activity goes behind doors. So what's the street happening? You'll see, and all of us have experienced up and coming neighborhoods where it's like we were in the fine line versus being not a people place. And then when it becomes a people place, somebody has to take that risk first. And there will be a period of transition where you still have to be cautious about what happens there and how people behave. But once people attract more people and then people bring more, and then activity starts to kind of, I would say, exponentially then happen. The wharf in DC was inhabitable 30 years ago when I came here. You went to the club, salsa dance for a while, and after that you ran home as fast as you could. Now it's thriving, but there was a time when it was transitional, and we have to, so these are the things that you're bringing here too, the cultural transitions of neighborhoods, which is fabulous. And then lastly, the commercial space, if you can think about the definition of that, because it could be you mentioned that, but I think it was kind of like in your very quickly. A lot of these families have probably businesses like a home salon or incubator space where they're trying to do some kind of enterprise to make ends meet. And sometimes it is their rooms or the kitchens where those happen. Commercial space, when you think about it, is not just for service, but it could be incubator space for their own enterprise where you can live upstairs and work, provided that the zoning ordinance allows. So there are components to that, but I think the bones are here and there's just so many things. This is a very, very promising project. And I just love personally when I go to a neighborhood and I feel the history by looking at the texture. So many times we want to emulate those textures and it's faux.
Yeah.
You can tell from a mile away that it's not real. I think this you're keeping real materials on site, which is what we long for sometimes in projects. So not quite a question. I think it was more reflections. I think your project is well founded. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I like the level of details and the level of covering the entire range of representations. So in terms of floor plans, sections, images, views, site plans. I have a few questions regarding really accepting shape grammar as a fact. It's like I want to hear some interrogation about shape grammar because it has been criticized in the literature. That's shape grammar. It has its issues by focusing on the spatial dimensions, the physical dimensions of architecture, while not looking at the social aspects of it. So have you had a chance to come across, or did you come across some of the critique or criticism of shape grammar, or looked for other similar approaches?
I would say I haven't come across as many criticisms. I did look at examples of it proposed for other areas. I've seen it more so applied in a mathematical sense. So I examined specifically some examples that also use Baltimore row homes and use shape grammar more deeply to add windows and like create different circulation patterns and program uses. I would say in this instance, I've almost created more of a kit of parts because there aren't rules where it's like if you use I, then you have to use R. So it's more so just creating modules that can be used to create different spatial qualities.
Okay. Why do we do this? Why do we do rules? Why? It's like people have been designing houses without rules. So why rules are important in your project?
I would say it's important because they can be used across these houses to create many variations quickly, as opposed to an architect taking a lot of time to develop one specific house, which of course has its benefits. But for this specifically, I think the speed.
Very good. What about affordability?
Yeah, I think this also speaks to kind of the affordability. because these elements can be replicated and constructed in a similar way.
Okay.
Um,
Very good.
yeah.
So, now, something about innovation. In the course of events throughout the year, and innovation is defined in the course or the program description as not a novelty, but a critical perspective and a synthesis. So tell me or tell us, what are the key innovative aspects of your project?
That's a good question.
Where innovation actually lies here?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the innovation kind of lies in the kit of parts and the inclusion of the courtyard in order to create spaces that don't currently exist in Baltimore. I think there's kind of a problem in Baltimore with people moving out when they want to have access to more green space. They want larger backyards. And this project proposes a way to do that while still retaining historic elements and while still fitting into the existing neighborhood context.
Okay. One final thing. Now, especially in the context of Europe, and I don't know if that's the case in the US about the housing and social housing issues. Probably the challenge in Europe is more than the US, but it's there. So now, how do you see your project contributing to the discussions on housing in the US?
Yeah, I think having options for smaller units within areas that are usually only single family is important. I also think these have the opportunity to be more affordable than some of the existing housing just because the units are smaller. I think like this communal courtyard space for people to gather isn't something that exists in a lot of smaller apartment buildings and neighborhoods. Yeah.
Okay. One final thing, sorry, this is too many questions. What makes your project sustainable? Especially environmental sustainability. I can relate and see a sense of community, access to amenities, the social, cultural, behavioral dimension of the project. But the environmental one, give us two features.
Well, I think the reuse of existing walls is one thing. And then I also think I didn't delve into this as deeply in design as I would have wanted, but I think the fact that they have courtyards that can provide some air circulation and hopefully some passive cooling
Okay.
would also be sustainable.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very impressive project in many ways, and the analysis is terrific. I would have argued the sustainability answer a little bit differently. I would have said sustainability begins with reinforcing existing settlement patterns, and there's already sewers and schools and fire departments and traffic lights and everything here. There's every reason we should re-inhabit our cities, and I think personally that's one of the great imperatives of our profession. Having said that, there's a couple of things I think to me that are, there's a lot of things to admire. I particularly like the one row house, 2 units, because I think somebody could buy that and rent a unit out, and that is an affordable way to inhabit the city, that they can have an income while they're renting out another unit. And I think that's a nice way to do it. And you would think, were you to try and finance these, to sort of think your way through to how that would make it possible for people to do that, so that people could own 1 unit but rent out 2 units in the building and things and have a revenue stream, and that would make it more inhabitable. A couple of things to me, I think, are questions like, why not? Why couldn't you have done this? And then why did you do this? I'm a little worried about the Blue Jungle Gym and the courtyards, in a sense that I don't know. I mean, I think maybe just building a new brick wall would probably be just fine there. And it seems to be a bit of an overstatement. I could see maybe one end of the courtyard having one of these things, like a loggia or something there that somebody could sit out on. But it just seems to me to be so present there, particularly in these small perspectives, that you know, that it's a little bit disconcerting. The second thing I would say is that some of the courtyards, particularly this one, they seem a little bit big to me, a little bit cavernous. And I wonder, the one that seems right-sized to me is the middle one on the right side over there. And even that might be not enough to just have one half of it be a courtyard. You know, I think probably some of them are a little bit big there. And I think Madeline's point about outdoor private space is kind of important, that the alley and how people inhabit outdoor space is really kind of an essential thing that you need to include. The last thing I would say in terms of the urban design is that it seems to me that one other thing that could have been pushed on was, instead of, that's why I was asking a question about the continuous street wall there, I think there's probably another type that could have worked here, which is the Charleston House, which has a side loggia on it, because if you take out every other house and you have an empty lot next to your house, you could build a wall with a porch on the outside of it and still have a side yard. And that would be one other way to adapt one of these row houses. And it makes me wonder a little bit whether, you know, some of these streets in certain parts of Baltimore are very mean. They're very mean. There's hardly any street trees and things. Another possible urban thing would have been to give the front doors small sort of edicular porches that people could inhabit on the street, and maybe even narrow the street and make the streets one way or something, so you could actually covered outdoor space on the street. Those would be embellishments I would take a look at to figure out how to make all this work. The last thing I would say is these all can survive with a single stair fire escape.
Yes.
They fall within the low enough density to have a single stair
Yes.
like that. Well, that's very good, because the world is heading towards single stair fire escapes for multi-unit buildings, which it should, because it makes them more affordable. But it's a very nice project.
Thank you.
Lauren, somebody back there. Reaching.
So I just want to also commend you for a really impressive project. Glad you took this on. The perspective of adaptive reuse and retaining neighborhood character, something very dear to my heart. I've lived in row houses as well as Trinity's, the little one-room stack behind, renovated row houses, thought about this a lot. And in Philadelphia, though, not in Baltimore. And one of the things I was thinking about was sort of what Professor Salama said. My one reservation has to do with the shape grammar as the organizing principle. I think you would like to look at the approach of the typological schools of transformations in Spain and Italy and Portugal. It's interesting that you mentioned Alvaro Siza, because there's a lot of great precedents there. So for example, in his rebuilding of Shadow Quarter in Lisbon, right, there was an agreement that he felt he wanted to maintain the historic sense of the neighborhood. There was probably also historic designation involved. And he basically said, well, I don't really care about the facades. The facades are going to be what they are. But what's really interesting is he sort of analyzed them bay by bay, and then he modified them in very subtle ways without the historical detailing. Right? And making slots in certain openings, right? Which I think is some of the feedback you've been getting. So if you think of these structural walls, the front and back, as being non-structural, right? You have the possibility for these slots, either visual, air, ventilation, porches, street life sort of, sneaking out. And I feel like it's starting to happen in your facade with the green that's showing back.
Yeah.
Maybe more pop-ups, right? So maybe I guess what I'm saying is maybe a little bit less respect to preserving the historical streetscape exactly as it is. Kuman, did you want to say something? No.
Lauren, thanks for the presentation. When I was a kid, I had a friend whose parents owned a row house in Chelsea. And they took a Sawzall to the end of the first floor and cut the floor to the back. So they had this 2-story jungle gym, basically. And and their beds were hung by chains. It was really wild. So, so that, sort of modification of being able to figure out what you need and what you don't need and where you can cut things is really interesting to me. I would, you're hearing a lot of people building on what you've done because you've done such a beautiful job. And what I hope you take away from this is starting to think about where you can take away, for example, where you might, with this structure, where you might leave a pocket park, like how there's a response to the local conditions. So you set up this whole structure of possibility, and then it gets adapted. I totally agree with Professor Bell's comment about the front sidewalk, right? They're very mean. You could modify that entrance. You can leave out some of the houses. And you can, just looking at your site condition, we haven't really talked about this because we've been talking about it more as a general proposal. Across from your particular buildings is a supermarket, right? And on the other side, we have an alley, but it's a really wide alley that's actually a park. So, so on one hand, there's the conditions of the ideal in this world of the types, but then there's the response to the site. And if you have a chance to even sketch out or think as you write your final chapter, to think about how an overarching kind of strategy for these buildings then gets modified to respond to the existing conditions and what the neighborhoods need.
Yeah.
And I think that could really enrich your project, even if you don't go there. So for example, one other thing, like if I look at this, big section perspective in front of me, that whole first floor could be commercial because you've created this inner courtyard. And so just a paragraph or two at the end of your thesis talking about this local conditions and how these could get modified for that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, it's such a shame that Everardo Jefferson couldn't be here for your particular project. He's a member of the Historic Preservation Commission in New York City, and they are currently considering the question of how to preserve brownstones, what the rules are. And we had tremendous arguments all weekend about this question. It's clearly established that there's a mandate to preserve what you see from the public way. But what was controversial in our home, at least, was the question about the importance of preserving what you see from the back. In New York, the houses are arranged around donuts. Here, they're arranged around alleys. But in New York, the current rule is you have to preserve the volume of the house. You can push out, you can add, but you cannot cut away the volume. And you also have to preserve the fenestration up on the top floor because that's, in the sight line. And so I think that that's just another overlay of consideration in your project. What does it mean to preserve the urban fabric of Baltimore? You talked, I think, very nicely at the beginning about using the urban fabric to restore the city. And so I'm just dropping that one in and saying that if Everardo was here, we might be having screaming matches about this question.
Just to add to that, I was just thinking, because I appreciate your comment about maybe disrupting some of these facades to create something unique that is harmonious, but it's newer. I think at the end of the day, I mean, you did your case based on this particular neighborhood, but this model can apply to any neighborhood, right? The idea is you can export this. Well, you'll be faced with historic preservation committees and zoning regulations in every single place. There you go. And so in some places you will be, as an architect, will be allowed to explore other things. And in some cases it will be very hard to deviate from those styles. So challenges will come in all shapes and forms. And this is contemplate some of that.
Yeah, that's something I considered in picking the site. I was looking originally at a site that was officially a historic designated zone, and I realized that it might be a little too restrictive. And I think there's also there's also so many historic homes in Baltimore that aren't preserved, and many of them are in these red line communities. So there's an opportunity that even though we don't strictly have to preserve these facades, we still can choose to do so.
Just throw it over. This is a terrific project. I have two grandsons who've just purchased together a house on Federal Hill in Baltimore. And what they're going through is not at all involved with NIMBYism. It's basically complex regulations and really ad hoc construction. So look, West Baltimore is an open wound in the city of Baltimore, and you've provided us a kit of possibilities to interest people in investing in that neighborhood. And I think it's a tremendous thing and has to be seen by people who are worried about that. They can't even do a transportation system for West Baltimore. They can't decide on what to do. This is a terrific contribution to that whole discussion, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Lauren, first of all, I want to highlight your process because it was a super rich research process. You were studying out many houses, not only here, but also in different contexts. You're also trying to decode or understand the language or different architectural language, encode them as a system, testing them, removing some of them, creating some constraints. There is a lot of here, and then formalizing a grammar that is not a shape grammar, but also typological grammar. And I agree about shape grammar because it's a more visual tool, but here you're also adding the functionality and possibilities of using this space instead of just having like geometry. So that goes beyond. And I feel that there is also the basis for a computational approach. So if you add this to some specific software, and of course, there is also in Revit, you can add cost to these rules, and you can also make it affordable and make the decisions based on the cost. You can also have like performance-based design, add some plugins, and then test if that courtyard specific location is better or no. So this expands a lot, though. So instead of like thousands of variations, you have like more than that. If you also consider that some partition rules, they don't address a specific activity, but could be a living room, could be a playroom, could be an office space. It's amazing. So I'm so glad to have a chance to work with you this semester, like this year. You did have a great job here. Congratulations, and I wish you all the best because you're a great designer and you deserve it. Thank you.
We will take a few minute break and start here at 4 p.m. All right, we're going to get started. Our final thesis candidate that we are going to review today is Matthew Mariano. The committee was chaired by Peter Noonan, and the committee members included Joseph Williams and I.
Yeah, so thank you for everyone to come. Good afternoon. I just want to say a quick thank you to my thesis chair, Peter, as well as my committee with Britt and Professor Williams, as well as everyone else that's given me some support and guidance throughout this past year. But anyways, let's get started. So this is manufacturing change, redeveloping waterfront brownfield sites. So starting with a bit of history about our industrial waterfronts. At the turn of the 20th century, our waterfronts transformed in the age of the Industrial Revolution. Industry was flocking to the water because of steam power, shipping lines, and because of that, these areas became lifelines for these communities, providing jobs at the ports and factories, economically fueling the neighborhoods that they resided in. However, by mid-century, with the globalization of the economy as well as a shipping revolution, many of these waterfront industries were abandoned and kind of fed into a pattern of deindustrialization through mid-century, becoming abandoned, inaccessible hazards. So it is part of a wider problem that brownfields are in the United States. There are over 450,000 brownfields in the United States, and it affects nearly half of the US population, given that almost half live within 3 miles of one. You notice in the map provided by the EPA that a majority of those brownfield sites, those abandoned industrial sites, are in the northeastern port cities and Rust Belt that we were talking about with the industry from the Industrial Revolution. So these brownfield sites become pockets of disinvestment and create perceived crime, which kind of create a vicious cycle of limited socioeconomic opportunity and mobility upwards. People see these abandoned places, and it is difficult to invest into these places for developers. So it creates a cycle where jobs are lacking from the industry that had left, and education is usually low, and other things like hospitals are also not available. So it's apparent that an architectural solution is needed to restore access to these brownfields and reintegrate them into their communities. Historic manufacturing sites are an opportunity for smarter land utilization, and the waterfront element of it provides an opportunity for environmental restoration as well. So the question is, how can waterfront brownfields be reconnected to create more resilient communities? This thesis investigates the practice of adaptive reuse and environmental restoration to give communities the ability to reclaim once neglected land into their wider fabric, restitching it in to create a place that provides an opportunity to produce socioeconomic mobility upwards, as well as restore some past environmental injustices. So when studying for this thesis and figuring out strategies that are in successful adaptive reuse projects, waterfront brownfield redevelopment seemed to have 4 main categories that I focused in on. Those included a programmatic liquidity, which which was the ability of the building to evolve with necessity, shedding its past programmatic function and typology, adjusting throughout time and with the needs. Another big element was waterfront activation. Creating a public space on the waterfront was vital to attracting people to come to the site and create interest in the area. Another thing discussed was structural tectonics, which looked into new versus old structural systems and the distinction between them. Often there's the existing structure being one element and then a secondary new structure being added for new programming and new function in these buildings. And then finally, these projects oftentimes restored some environmental function in these projects to help undo the years of neglect as well as industrial pollution. So for this project, to set out to create a successful adaptive reuse at the waterfront, there was a protocol that I felt created the best opportunities to reconnect these abandoned sites into these neighborhoods. These elements that were required for a good site included the fact that it was a brownfield site, an abandoned industrial or commercial site with perceived pollution, distinctly in the 20th century. There needs to be a rich urban context, one where the connectivity of the neighborhood is fractured because of this abandoned waterfront. There needed to be a existing building that was created with strong materials as well as materials that sequestered carbon. So we were looking for buildings that were made of concrete or steel, things like that. And then finally, the last requirement for this project was to find a site, an area that had enough size to create public interventions, create public space for people to flock to. So that led us to New York City. The answer to this question was actually a small neighborhood called Red Hook. New York City was and still is, a large industrial port. But in the early 20th century, there was heavy waterfront industry in neighborhoods like this, particularly in Brooklyn, which is where Red Hook is. Red Hook is a less densely populated neighborhood of wider Brooklyn. The neighborhood itself actually sits on the Gowanus Bay and runs from the Buttermilk Channel to the Gowanus Canal. Specifically, this site, outlined in red, sits on the Henry Street Basin, which will become a place that we will environmentally reclaim. So a bit further into the history of the neighborhood of Red Hook, historically, this neighborhood was low tidal marshes as well as pebble beaches. Today, the neighborhood is primarily infill, given the fact that it was such an industrial neighborhood. A lot of the ports were developed on the coasts and came inland. So if we take a look at our site in particular, by 1924, when this image was taken, the site was developed with what will become the subject of this project, the Red Hook grain elevator. It was part of wider development on the Gowanus Canal at the time. There was a lot of industry coming in and shipping was becoming a large part of this neighborhood's economy. So the grain elevator was built as a place to store grain and then ship it back out. By mid-century, the neighborhood had actually developed to kind of respond to this new port industry coming in. Public housing as well as community amenities were developed in the 1930s and 40s. And these developments still remain a part of the identity of the neighborhood today. Also during this time, you can notice that the neighborhood was cut off from the rest of Brooklyn essentially with the elevated Gowanus Expressway, which opened in 1942. So that made the neighborhood somewhat isolated, somewhat removed from the rest of the city, making it a bit more at risk for the economic collapse that was soon to come, unfortunately. By the late 20th century, much of that port industry in the neighborhood had essentially left, and the grain terminal had been abandoned by the mid-60s. There was also a canal terminal on the site, and that was demolished in the 1980s. You could see that during this time, large port space became auto pounds, and lots of the industrial space on the waterfront became abandoned parking lots as well as just roped off space. But since the late 90s, the neighborhood has kind of been in a transition. New companies and new industry has moved in, providing things that residents would need to live healthier lives in the neighborhood, and providing new jobs and opportunities for the local residents. So you can see some of those jobs and industries included in IKEA as well as a supermarket. And you can start to see the development of some public space on that waterfront just across the street from our site. So this pattern has kind of continued up till recently. Amazon has now kind of moved into this neighborhood and provided more industrial jobs, although it is now a light industry with warehouses. You could actually see 3 of them pop up basically within stone's throw of the site. So showing you the neighborhood continuing to flux to a new era of economics. But given what is nearby the site, there's opportunity to spur additional positive development for this neighborhood. The proximity to Red Hook Park, directly north of the site, as well as the Red Hook homes, provides a chance for this once abandoned and neglected site to be reconnected into the wider neighborhood. And those amenities that are already existing provide an opportunity to supply more housing and more retail opportunities. So one of the reasons why this building was chosen was because of its monumentality. The site is adjacent to water on both sides with the Henry Street Canal Basin as well as the Gowanus Bay to the south. It was also chosen because of the inaccessibility to the waterfront in that area. Wanted to provide an opportunity to connect from the existing rec center and homes back out to the water, using the park essentially as a promenade to the water. So to talk a little bit about that disconnectivity with the neighborhood, the inaccessibility to the waterfront as well as the city can still be seen here. Dark orange represents the abandoned industry on the waterfront, and the light orange shows the active industry or lots on the waterfront, essentially buffering the neighborhood from reaching outwards and claiming the waters that would make it give it its more unique identity, its own personality in the wider city. You could also see that this disconnectivity is also partially because of the access to transit currently. There's some routes in, but one of the best public transit opportunities is through IKEA. They run a boat that runs there on the neighborhoods, and that's almost closest to the site. So with this this project, the idea would be to spur up more development, spur up more interest in further developing and fleshing out this limited transit in the area. So you can see in its immediate context that the site is essentially on an island out there. The terminal is sitting almost by itself, and the lots around it have been cleared. And you can see it similarly with the types of buildings that are nearby. There still is a lot of industry on this waterfront, but you're starting to get a bit of a swing with some commercial buildings and civic buildings nearby. So for this particular building, to provide programming that the neighborhood needed, we distilled it down to 5 pillars. First being to gather, essentially just bringing people together at this place. Want to create a space where people can come together and enjoy each other's times, creating a new public space essentially for the neighborhood. And on that note, create was another pillar, restoring and creating accessibility to the waterfront, as well as developing new resources for the neighborhood. Will create new opportunity for this building to fill the needs of the place. Living wanted to provide additional housing in this neighborhood. As talked about earlier, one of the largest housing units in the neighborhood is Red Hook Houses, which is stock that is almost 100 years old at this point. So providing new housing to attract new residents to the neighborhood. Place wants to create a bit of cultural pride through this industry, using this icon as the backdrop for this new destination. And then finally, connect. Connecting the people to the waterfront, connecting the existing housing, the existing park to this place that had been inaccessible for over 60 years. So getting into the site, this is the existing conditions of the site. You can see the terminal lit up in red. It backs right up to Henry Street Basin, as well as the Gowanus Bay. The nearest street that is existing is this Columbia Street that runs down the side of the site on the west. Talking a bit more about the building. Here's some images of the building. The terminal is, like I said, monumental. It is gigantic. The building is made up of silos, slip-formed concrete, circles, as well as like these star-shaped ones. And the whole thing is held up with these massive mushroom columns on the ground floor. I don't know if you noticed, but you're actually sitting in a silo right now. This blue tape on the ground is the size of one of the silos in the building. So you can see there's opportunity, there's space that can be utilized in this building, even though in its current state it is sitting abandoned. So going into a bit of the existing conditions, you can see that there's kind of multiple types of these silos. You got the circular ones, you got these like star-shaped ones, and the half kind of circle ones on the exterior. And then on the ground floor is where those mushroom columns are, essentially holding up the behemoth of the building. And of course, since it is a grain elevator, these are silos. There is no floors in these right now. It is empty from top to bottom. And obviously, this was a challenge that was needed to be addressed to provide new programming and a new life to this building and site. So if we look a little bit more into how the building is structured with the concrete, like I said, the mushroom columns essentially support each silo. Each of these circular silos are held up by 4 columns, and they are in rows of 3 and stretch 18 long, actually 430 feet long is this building. It's It's very big. But this is what I'm proposing. This project proposes bringing the grid through the park where this existing bit had been and connecting the building to that road and creating a promenade from the park to the water. The site itself, Henry Street Basin, will be developed with floating wetlands to help restore some of the environmental function in the waters surrounding the building. Some of the decisions made, most of the decisions made for this building kind of focused around the massing and the program of the building, the strategy when it came to that. There was a large study that I undertook throughout the process that saw many little models be created, testing out different strategies, different ways of going about stripping back what was there existing to put new functions in. You can see here in the program strategy diagram as well, there will be new apartments as well as lofts, retail opportunities on the ground level, and then essentially a community tower is what we came up with, kind of dividing up the existing monolith into 3 distinct regions. So to get into a bit more with that, the existing massing gets stripped back to reveal the silo forms. The program divides the building from community function to residential function. New additions, saddlebags essentially are added on to house that programming, and then it's reconnected and the top is taken off to provide more new daylighting in. So you can see that here where it goes from its existing form. It is subtracted. This window is kind of created through the building to the final product, which will become the anchor for new development. And this is achieved through structural intervention utilizing mass timber. These mass timber floors and beams are created outside of the building and then would be lowered into the silos from the top. That will provide the opportunity to accommodate the new program, to put in floors into something that did not have floors and would be very difficult to lay things in given the confined work area. So you can see here how essentially the existing concrete acts as a skeleton to bolt things onto and drop things into for the new function and new life of the building. You can see that those tectonics are expressed on the exterior of the building, where the fluted silos are standing tall, as well as the marine towers that hold the circulation, and then the wood contrasting that to show where new programming, new functions are happening. There was it was almost like working a collage of new and existing elements. There was the existing concrete, the existing steel side that came out that was once part of the system that transported the grain to the water, and that gets integrated in with the wood to distinguish different regions of the plan as well as the function. So you can see, once again, going back to how that how the building is essentially split up into 3 areas. There's the community area, which houses the community center, the gallery, and the library. This middle section, which houses the marketplace that's on the ground floor, the window that goes from the park to the basin. And then, of course, you have the large residential part that provides these unique apartments for people to move in. Some vignettes that kind of match the experience of these places and the unique elements of each part of the building, different languages in each part of the building. You have these elevated halls in the area of the residential building. The marketplace is on the ground, essentially guiding people underneath of the building towards the waterfront. And then you have these high double height spaces in the community area to provide opportunity for exhibitions in the art gallery, as well as a more dramatic library. So you can see in plan how this translates, where you have this marketplace coming through the building, separating essentially retail and the residences with the community functions here. And then upstairs, how many of those silos are preserved in many places to create a unique kind of form and experience inside of them. So once again, you can see here that window essentially becoming a landmark and a wayfinder even from the water. If we get into a bit more specifics, the strategy for the plan for the apartments in particular, as well as just the silos in general, was a party where tried to preserve as much of the silo as possible, but create these kind of central views outwards towards the water and back towards the skyline of New York City. To achieve this, many of these apartments worked in free plan with a piece of central cabinetry, essentially to anchor the functions around it, instead of building up new walls all the time to lessen the form of the existing concrete. And that can be seen here in some of these typical units, including a studio, 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom unit. So that was manufacturing change and where it stands today. Thank you for your time, and open the floor to questions.
Could you go back to the slide that shows the historic structure? And then show us what you're stripping away. I got a little confused about that because
The diagram?
yeah, but so when you look at the historic view, which I think was a couple slides before that, it looks like there's masonry wrapping the silo.
Yeah. So there is there's the multiple types of silos. There's the circular ones, there's the half circle ones, and the star ones. What you're seeing being removed here in those red stripes are the half silos to better showcase the form of the full silo. I think that to strip back and reveal its more industrial origins, that was the choice with removing that part of the form.
Can you just go back to the historic photo of the outside? Sort of the massing. Yeah, that's existing.
Yeah.
So what exactly on the masonry wrap are you removing?
So if you can see, it's a concrete building. So it'd be stripping out, essentially, this is a full silo. This is a half silo. This is a full silo, half silo. So it'd be doing like every other one on the community part of the building. It's not actually stripping them out in all the places. It's actually on the residential part of the building, only stripping them out on the top. And it's preserving it for much of the bottom, because that becomes the spaces where you saw the closets and other things as well. Like here, you can see with the red dashes where it's been removed.
There's no masonry. It's all concrete.
Like in its existing form? You can see it a bit. I mean, I think that the idea to strip it back further was to just further distinguish the forms. I felt as if it was muted a bit when it came to when it had the half silos in between.
So in a way, they're kind of buried.
Yeah.
They're kind of
Yeah.
englobated inside.
Mhm.
you sort of scratched away.
Yeah, it was scratched. Right. Yes, the entire building is made out of
Yeah, I'd like to, well, I would like to voice my appreciation for your project for taking on this adaptive reuse. I would like to say, I'd like to comment on two things. One is the building and the other is the neighborhood planning aspects of it. But since Professor Bell started with the building, I'd like to say you've got so many fabulous drawings. I'm asking for another one or two now. And those are essentially the demo drawings, but perhaps also the construction drawings, because I'm now curious, were these silos initially expressed and then did an outer layer come in? Or was the building built in one iteration and that was it? So these half silos, this is fascinating to me because I've never either seen them or thought about them before. And I'm just wondering, was grain really stored in half silos initially?
Yeah, so the building is actually a kind of unique example of these grain elevators. Most of the time, you just see those full silos like everyone sees. This building was unique in the sense that there was multiple types with the half silos and the star silos. It was all built at once, the concrete parts. Some of the exterior parts of the metal and there's like the masonry box on the front. Those parts might have been added and edited later, but from what I could find with some of the original documents as well as photographs seem to verify that all the concrete was poured at the same time.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. I mean, that answers a lot of questions. And, you know, if you, after you've gotten a few months of sleep, if you want to add any
Yeah.
drawings for your portfolio, I think that a drawing showing how it was built through history and how you're proposing to demo it as a continuation, or demo parts as a continuation of the history, would be a very good idea. And similarly, the neighborhood, what did the plan look like in its heyday? What's it look like now? And what's going to look like in the future? And so this is a step into that future.
Yeah.
It's an interesting industrial waterfront area because not all industry has abandoned it. And in fact, new industry has moved in, IKEA and Amazon. So it's clear it's not going to totally shift over to become the residential community. So one question I have then is, how are these industrial uses going to coexist with the new residential uses you're bringing in? And I think there are some clues already. I mean, IKEA is not just a place to buy stuff, but it's also a place to go eat, and drop your kids at the play place and so forth. So, you know, you could really think about this being a place that the neighborhood goes to, not just to buy more stuff for their apartments, but also as a kind of social hub. And, you know, Amazon might be encouraged to become a better community participant here. So I can imagine, you know, if you had a few more years for the thesis, that you would be planning around what that coexistence of industry and residents looks like.
Yeah.
And I can also say from my experience that it's terribly important to get to the F and G trains at Smith 9th Street Station. So I think it would be very important to show how people are going to be having a safe walk through the neighborhood at night to get to these residences. And I think also it's going to be important to show how they're going to drive in and park. Red Hook has become an expensive place to live. So there is a real market for, you know, people with money coming in to buy these places. So I think you need to think about how to kind of accommodate that
Right.
lifestyle in your neighborhood planning. And then just one more quick thing about the building and the adaptive reuse. I'm very interested in tectonics, and I have questions like how much of the silo can you cut out and still have structural integrity? And how are these new mass timber elements getting anchored once they've come in? So, maybe you didn't have enough time to explain all these things. Oh, I see you got a detail. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit further. There was a bit discussion about how much can we take out, and that's kind of influenced the strategy for the apartments with the kind of central cabinet and cutting out just that main view. From precedents, it seems that there's a lot of buildings that take out sometimes significant amounts of these silos, given that it's all one form. It seems that they're kind of resilient. These buildings were actually built to be blast resistant because sometimes the grain would blow up. So like they are pretty strong. But that was definitely a concern. And then when it comes to the timber getting dropped into it, essentially taking the top off and then dropped in from the top, it'd be like partial beams. It wouldn't go around the entire silo. They would be mounted at points using rebar and things like that to kind of drill into the existing concrete. And then the CLT flooring would essentially sit on top of those foots and hang out across. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so you can see that over here with the detail as well as how they're dropped in from the top there. The idea would be that this stuff would be assembled beforehand, either on site or at a factory, and then shipped in and put it from the top instead of having to create these inconvenient workspaces inside of those silos.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive project. I don't have probably questions except a couple of comments. I should say contextual analysis, documentation, programming, very well developed throughout. And I like that the programming process and the thought process in these sketches were really translated into floor plans in an existing building, which is a great challenge. Now, perhaps the amount of time you spend on the building took away from the site. One important thing is that we wanted to know what is the user population, what's the user profile? Who are the people who you will attract to come here? This is one important thing. And the other is, yes, I was talking about the urban space. I would have liked to see a strategy for the context around the green spaces around the building, your building. So can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, I can talk a bit more about that. So the building itself would essentially, it would aim to attract residents in the community as well as new residents that they're looking for kind of like a boutique apartment, boutique spaces, given the fact that the building is strange. The river walk or the basin walk, so to speak, would kind of become this space on the ground floor, flanked by the marketplace as well as some small retail and larger retail on the front. So essentially becoming a place where people can go and hang out in urban space, kind of like inspired like almost like the Wharf or something like that in DC. And it kind of aims to be not necessarily the end, but aims to be a destination from the park above and from the existing waterfront walk from the west. So it kind of becomes a node on that journey. And kind of going back to what you had actually said as well, the idea maybe one day would be that it would kind of extend upwards, up the canal, up towards that train station at Smith and Ninth. To kind of really make the community.
So that could be like a future urban strategy.
Yeah, yeah. If there was a whole strategy behind it, that would essentially be that element.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I wanted to commend you also for the incredibly thorough and well-documented analysis, and then those diagrams showing us the context. I really appreciated that. You really made a good case for, why intervening in this particular place and eventually how it will connect to the rest. So it was great. I really loved, one question I have is, have you considered climate change and sea level rise? And of course, in New York, there's quite a bit of work being done now, and as it relates to that. And I thought that could be an opportunity to maybe rethink that ground floor. I was just thinking about what it would be to live in a place like this, and the kind of relief you would want from the architecture itself. I mean, I know you guys, probably are all architects, 100% architects. I'm a little bit of a landscape. So it just makes me feel like, well, maybe I want to get out, stretch my wings a little bit, and I find that you've kind of hinted at it by creating this kind of boardwalk and then this kind of, treatment area where water will, but the question is, sea level rise, could that ground floor be opened kind of a la Hamburg to, accommodate, sea level? I mean, it will come eventually.
Right.
And I think we'll probably be 6 to 8 feet above where it is today. So that could already sort of start challenging a little bit of your decisions at that ground floor. And then the last thing is, I also agree that the landscape itself, the landscape that goes with this building could be, as you show, sort of a replication of those geometries, but it becomes extremely sort of monotonous. So thinking about a reaction to it, that could be something that's completely completely different, organic, more variegated with different heights. Thinking about mounds, something that, and where maybe polluted soil could be stockpiled. And so I think, it's really fascinating. But this being said, this is a great sort of collection of drawings and a great storytelling all the way down to the details. So I really appreciated this. In Oslo, I think the architecture school, AHU, has housing in silos. So it's not uncommon. I mean, of course, it's students.
Right.
So thinking about the kind of user that will go in it, probably somebody who either, is so New York that, anything works,
Yeah.
or a student or somebody who would need housing temporarily. I wouldn't think of this as kind of a lifelong commitment, to a house, but we want potentially to sort of think about, that kind of lifelong attachment to the place. But very well done. And then if you have a question, if you have a answer about climate change, and if you've thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that climate change was something that we had thought about. Red Hook is definitely a neighborhood that climate change is a threat, a challenge to it. Essentially, given the fact that the building is on the water, I wanted to have the marketplace be on that ground level, but I also wanted to clear out that space above it too. So potentially in the future, it could be that maybe something shifts upward. This is an adaptive reuse. Doesn't mean that adaptive reuse can't happen again in the future as well. But the idea of having like the wetlands and the basin and things like that, those are all little things that maybe help a little bit. I know it might be a bit like putting a Band-Aid on like a bullet hole, but things to help in the moment at least. Yeah, and as far as like what you had said with the type of housing it is, yeah, I understand that, it's a very unique space. So I think that I agree when it comes to kind of maybe not forever, but definitely more of a artsy kind of crowd or things like that. And like you had said, there is precedent for it in other places.
Thank you for a great presentation. I agree with everybody's comments so far. Very well documented. You made the case for it. It's clear and legible. We understand why you were attracted to this site as far as like imagining the possibilities. As the landscape architect practitioner here, I agree with everybody's comments about bringing that sense of open space and the grid and your connectivity, number one. Number two, I can see that you start thinking about green infrastructure at the rooftop, at the mid-level, and of course with the wetlands. And of course, you spend a fair amount of time designing the building, so I totally get it that it's not fully articulated, but I think you've put the elements in your study. Because you're also looking at the geometry of the building and how it's incorporating all of these different opportunities for green infrastructure. And I think that green, when you think about the square feet, I mean, you said 400 and something long feet. This is longer than a football field, folks. I compare everything to a football field because everybody knows exactly what that looks like. This is a big building. And so green infrastructure can have an impact. And so I think to kind of have a little that layer later on to think about how that can be incorporated could be huge. I appreciate your nod on the wetland restoration and kind of reclaim that basin for something that is a lot more environmentally friendly. It's going to take probably years and it's going to be 10 projects in and of themselves to do something there of that magnitude. But it's like you're dreaming big. This is big. It's one of a kind. I appreciated your unit studies because well, there's two things. On the architecture, when I look at that without looking at your historic photo, this could have been designed by somebody that had like, oh, I'm just going to design a building that reference silos and maritime construction. Exactly. I don't necessarily. So it is rooted and it has the core of that, but it's an elegant solution in my opinion. What I am fascinated by specifically, maybe because I'm standing right in front of your unit designs, how this geometry that is challenging in and of itself is lending this creative harmony of all the spaces, the kitchen and the bathroom and all this stuff. And I guess the question to you is that you probably thought about your fair housing standards and ADA standards and circulation space. I mean, when you have a non-standard space, they become very, very challenging. And I guess I'm rambling quite a bit, but if you can kind of think about tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, it was challenging. I try to consider all the standards needed for, fair housing when I was developing the silos. I think that we found it easiest to do something that was anchored with like a central piece instead of having like the walls kind of stretch out all over the place and segmented up. You can actually see all the way over here. I actually have some of the studies. They're a little tiny, but it was pretty early on when we kind of decided that this was the right strategy to do, where we have like a central kind of cabinet anchoring the thing. So that way the concrete's expressed and we get to maintain that kind of unique feeling. But simultaneously still have enough space, segmented up. As you can see by the tape on the floor, it's a fair space. So you can probably get multiple functions in it. And utilizing the stars was really like the biggest kind of key to this. I felt like the circles were the champions. You had like the major spaces there. You had the living room, you had some of the bedrooms, but then kind of utilizing that star space, that kind of regular shape to fit in the back of house, fit in the bathrooms and things like that. That was the strategy when it came to that. Challenging, but I think that, given the condition, I think we did okay.
Very creative. No, and then two more questions. So with that, we'll go with your vertical circulation of all the ducts and duct banks and stuff that comes with it, which will create maybe another layer of that thought process. But very commendable by any chance. And then coming by every stretch of imagination. And the comment about people who's going to want to live here, people that like authenticity, they'll be flocking to this because it's authentic. You're not creating something out of the blue that pretended to be an industrial. It was already here, is reimagined, is one of a kind. This is the kind of people will, if their space is there and the infrastructure is there and there's already a plan for transit and amenities and other things coming in the land use plan, this has a lot of a good base for success. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think this is a very impressive project, Matt, and it's an extremely difficult one. And I commend you for taking it on because it's the building is, when they say you don't build them like they used to, it's because they don't build them like they used to. This is really amazing and wild in that regard. It's not a landmark, is it? Is it?
No, not protected.
Because if it was protected, one of the things you would have to do would be to talk about the salient characteristics of the building and how what you're adding to it is compatible with those characteristics. That's where I get a little bit of trouble here, because I know you peeled this sort of layer off on the outside a little bit to reveal these curves. But then you added these flat pieces on the outside, which make the building look more horizontal, number one. And number two, I think are sort of neither fish nor fowl. I can't really tell what your material strategy is for those. And I think maybe a better strategy would not have been to make them like these boxes that are put on the outside, but actually make glass infill that was vertical, that was more in character with the vertical pieces you're revealing. And I look at your plan and I think it probably could have been done, given the depth of the stuff that or even not even have them at all there, whether that was even possible. Because to me, when I look at the early pictures you showed of the building, it's very powerful as this big monolithic thing. Whether you reveal the curvy things or not, the silos or not, it's got its own power and its own presence vertically. And I actually find the sort of Velcro things that have been stuck on the outside to kind of diminish that somewhat. And I would have maybe thought, well, if this thing is concrete, maybe a lighter glass kind of verticality of those elements would have at least preserved the sense of its verticality and brought a contrast very clearly to what you're adding to it versus what was original. And I think that would have made the thing really strong. One other comment too about the units. The units work really well. It's sometimes you have curved walls, you say to people, the furniture is never going to look right because everything's going to look kind of screwy. But actual fact, by inserting minimally these pink walls and stuff that you did, you kind of regularize them in a nice way so a room has half a curve and things that you can appreciate that. And I think that's very skillfully done. And I very much appreciate the section and stuff. I just think the outside for me is the thing that really has the power of it. And in particular, that elevation with these pieces put on the outside, to me, kind of diminishes the power of this really elemental form.
I want to say something quick about the units. I'm glad we're talking about that. Everything else that people have said, ditto, great work. I think it would be useful to see the square footages of those units, just as a comparison, because we all kind of know what a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, because of how inefficient they are necessarily. And you have some great perspective views of the project. I would love to see some views in the units, because it's a clever strategy. I'm not convinced about them because they're so forceful, but maybe, that's the nature of it. That's all. I mean, you've done a lot to try to figure out how to put it, but I would just love to see what is it like in there.
Right. If you want to live there, you're not worried about the sods.
Yeah, just a quick little thing, it might help, and it's not square footage, but each of these is, it's like a little over 20 feet wide. Yeah. So, yeah. So.
Everybody needs housing in New York, no matter what.
So I think Matt really put his finger on it, which is what I was trying to get at the beginning, trying to understand what is the monumental image? What is the monumentality of it, right? And which is why I had a little problem with the chiseling. What I wanted to see, I think, would help is a construction document, if you don't have it, then made up of the facade, like the outer bays. Where's the concrete? Where's the silo? What is that space material connection? And try to understand how that interfaces with the monumentality. So you're sort of exaggerating the vertical by exposing them right? So that's one comment. The other one is, I think Silo Point is a really interesting precedent because what Chris Pappel and his other architects did was for, functional reasons, basically because they couldn't comply with historic designation, it was designated, they just blew out a lot of the silos. So it seems like you're going to a great amount of trouble to keep silos when they're maybe not the most functional, right?
Right. And if I could just add a little thing with that, I actually did talk to Chris about his strategies at Silo Point. Silo Point was interesting because it's in Baltimore for those who may not know, Baltimore. There's square silos there as well as circular silos. So a lot of the units that were made in Silo Point sit in the square silos. In the end, there was originally plans to maintain parts of those circular silos, but they were all demolished, except for a few on the corners, which are not occupiable. So yeah, I mean, it might have been good to potentially, we considered other ways of going about preserving and demolishing silos. We had an experiment. We were considering demolishing the center row of the silos to free up some more space in the middle, potentially taking out larger chunks of the ones on the edges, but to kind of preserve the original kind of feeling of the silos and kind of create the unique interior space. That's why we ended up kind of keeping the circles mostly intact at the end. But yeah, thank you.
Great. So thank you, Matt. You brought a wonderful project, I think, to close the first day of thesis reviews. Matt was a treat to have as a student in 601 studio, but through the thesis journey as well. And I think the rich discussion that we've had over the last hour brings together really the education one gets here in the school, through Professor Bell's Architecture 700 course, through Michelle's adaptation seminar, the lessons you learned in 600 with Julie and Britt. I think all of those come to bear on what you investigated and shared with us today. Notwithstanding, I think the good discussion and the questions that came up about parts of the project. So Matt, he was delightful because you'd say, hey, how big are those silos? And you'd come in and he'd bring me up there outside the library and say, look down. He said, that's one of the silos on the floor. And we'd say, make a project or make a model, and 2 models would show up. And then I'd say, okay, make 2 more, and 2 more would show up. And then I'd say, double the scale after those 10 models were there, and he'd double the scale. Or go talk to a structural engineer and really figure out how this is going to be held up. And he has a Zoom meeting with a structural engineer we connect him with. Or, hey, I taught with Chris Baffel a couple of years ago. Let me hook you up in an email. And so I sent him an email, and a week later, he's on a Zoom session with Chris. So Matt, in his kind of quiet way, gets the work done and shows some great work, and we should applaud that. Thank you. So tomorrow we will meet back here at 9 a.m. for another wonderful day of thesis. Thank you to our guests this afternoon. Some of you are going to be with us the next few days. Some of you joined us for an afternoon. Thank you so much for your service to the school.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You can relax then.
Yeah, I know.
Beautifully drawn.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Get it. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Yeah. What are your plans now? Besides sleeping. Sleeping, probably 6 hours for sure. Nice job, man. Thanks. Yeah, yeah.